I'd say not very impressive. Definitely looks way better on this frame, and that's why we do it how we do it.
Welcome back to Brothers Fab and Adventure. Today we're going to do the experiment that we talked about last time, and we're going to put pearl and flake directly into Rustoleum to show you what you get, as opposed to top coating it like we did on the frame here. I also played around with mixing aluminum Rustoleum with colored Rustoleum paint to show you the metallic effect that can give you as well. Stick around and maybe we'll learn something together. The reason behind it is I'm a part of a number of groups on the internet, and I often see people ask if they can just add pearl or flake straight into the Rustoleum or into the paint in general. I had always been told that the paint is opaque as opposed to transparent, and as a result, if you add these things into the paint, they're just going to get buried. The paint's just going to cover them up because of the opacity of the paint, which always made sense to me. So I had never even tried it, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to do for you guys today here. I had seen other people claim that they had done it and had results with it, but I've always been skeptical and advised against it for that reason. Another thing that we're going to do today is basically what I had seen originally when I started looking into making custom metallic paint with Rustoleum. And there used to be this product called Rustoleum Mass Tone Base Tint. Clear base tint is basically what it is, and it would allow you to mix some of these particles into the paint while adding a little bit of the paint, like a color, and that makes the paint semi-transparent, which actually will allow some of the metallic particles to be seen through the paint instead of them just being completely covered up. We're going to run an experiment on that as well, because that's how I originally learned about making customized metallic paint, by using a clear tint base with your opaque paint and mixing your pearl and flake into that, so it's more like a single stage base coat with the metallics already in it. Makes it a little more simple, and we're going to see the difference between how all that looks compared to how we just did the paint job. That way everybody has a great comparison to make to decide what they want to do with their project. I will say, however, whatever method you go with, you're going to want to make sure that you cover the metallic particles, because you don't want them being exposed to the elements, the UV, and oxidizing and getting discolored and degrading over time. So it's really best to cover it with a 2K clear. I had also run some other experiments because I had heard of people mixing color of Rustoleum with aluminum Rustoleum paint to get a metallic effect. About a month ago, I just did some experiments on my own without recording them to kind of see for myself what that looks like. Ultimately, that's not the solution for me, but I'll go ahead and show you guys. The results of my first experiment, which were kind of crude, are a little bit hard to see because I was basically mixing the paint up in a little cup. I was using a tablespoon to get my ratios. I didn't have a whole lot of paint, and then I would take that paint and I would drip it onto a paint stick, or I'd basically just try to coat a paint stick in it. And so it resulted in some uneven finishes that are a little bit inconclusive, but I'm going to show you the results of that anyway, just so you can see for yourself. I got the cans open and I stirred them up, so I have a baseline of what the aluminum paint looks like on its own, as well as what the blue paint looks like on its own. And I mixed it at a 1-to-1 ratio with the aluminum and the blue using a tablespoon. The aluminum doesn't like to stay mixed very well, and so it's not exactly accurate, because as it dried it kind of separated out the aluminum from the blue paint there. I just kept working my way up, so I went to a 2-to-1, 2-to-1 here, then I went to a 3-to-1 and a 4-to-1, then I went 6-to-1 and 8-to-1. Finally I landed at a 10-to-1, so that's right there. So you can kind of see it definitely gives it a little bit of a metallic quality, but it's definitely not anything spectacular. Compared to the blue, it lightened up the color of the blue a little bit as well. So it's almost like mixing a little bit of white into your blue. It's not going to remain the same color when you mix the aluminum in. Depending on what you're after, that might work for you. So that's one way to go about getting a metallic look with the Rustoleum. After I got to the 10-to-1 ratio, I started to add some pearl and flake straight into the paint. And so that's what you get here. It's a little bit darker, but the pearl is not very magnificent. It helped to combat some of the lightening that the aluminum paint created. That was like 1 tablespoon of pearl and probably around like maybe 3 to 4 ounces of paint. So a lot of pearl compared to how much you usually want to use. Generally, they say you should keep to less than 10% of your overall mixture should be particles like your pearl and your flake to avoid adhesion problems. Next, I went with this top one here, and I added another tablespoon of the flake into it that we used on this other paint job. 10 parts blue, 1 part aluminum, 1 tablespoon pearl, 1 tablespoon flake, to like 4 ounces of paint or something like that. It was practically a paste. You could not spray this out of a gun. That's the result of adding 1 part of clear tintable base to this previous mixture up here, which poured 1 tablespoon of my previous mix into a cup, and then I mixed 1 tablespoon of the tint base. So here I just kept adding more tint base. 2 parts tint base to 1 part of previous mix, 4 parts tint base to 1 part previous mix. Most of the particles were still pretty buried. To finish, I figured I would just go to an extreme. Mix my 4-to-1 with 1 part pearl up here, this top one. And then I added 1 extra part of flake. So now I basically have 2 tablespoons of pearl and flake in the cup with very minimal paint, very pasty. It definitely started to change the color a lot more though, comparative to just adding it to the paint without the clear base. That's kind of where I'm at now. Three cups of paint left over, and the cups kind of give you a decent idea what it looks like. This is just the 10-to-1 aluminum to blue with pearl and flake added into it. The 10-to-1 blue with pearl and flake added into it, as well as the 4-to-1 clear tintable base. You can see some of the particles are showing up there. The final mixture, 4-to-1 tintable base to 10-to-1 blue and aluminum with a ton of pearl and flake added. And you can see it's definitely doing something there. I went ahead and poured it out on my bumper because eventually I'm going to remake my bumper, and I didn't really care about it, but it was a good place just to put the paint and see what it looked like. And this is the paint that I had left over from the first experiment that I poured on my bumper. This is the final batch that I had made up. This was the intermediary batch that I had made up with the clear tintable base. And this was just the blue and aluminum with pearl and flake in it with no clear tintable base. As you can see, it has a little metallic quality just from the aluminum, but none of the pearl and flake shows up. This is kind of a alright bridge, but still most of the pearl and flake is not all that visible. I can see some flake in there. And here you can tell it definitely darkened all the paint up, and it's still a little bit hard to see the pearl and flake as well, but it's definitely more apparent. Get this experiment started here. I'm gonna pour 2 ounces of black into this mixing cup, 2 ounces of acetone for a total of 4 ounces. Should at least give me 1 solid coat on the speed shape, maybe 2. I'm gonna go ahead and get that mixed, and I'm gonna add the exact same percentage of pearl powder into this as we did with the other paint job. So it should be an exact direct comparison. Can't even really see hardly any pearl in there, but to my surprise there is a tiny amount that is visible here. So my suspicion is that it's barely going to show any pearl at all in this mixture here. Ah, freaking idiot. Round 2. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of pearl in there. If you look real close, there is just the slightest hint of it. I'll walk around for you. Pretty much invisible. To me, that turned out pretty disappointing, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some flake into the mix now. It's gonna be approximately equivalent to what I just put in there. I'm just continuing to use the original mix, so it'll still have the pearl in there. Essentially, it'll have twice the amount of material that we used to paint the frame. So you would think if it's gonna show up twice the amount of material, it should show up. When we sprayed that frame, you could see it right away comparatively. And you got to be pretty close to see this doing its thing here. Mostly it just looks like black paint. I can kind of still see the flakes from about maybe 2 feet away. but once you get beyond that, it's probably not going to be a whole lot of visibility. Not that there's much even at that distance. I've got a little material left, and I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the speed shape here. I don't think that it's really going to do anything because of the opacity of the paint. It's probably mostly just going to cover up the previous layer. I've got paint left, so I'm going to use it. For whatever it's worth, from about a foot away, I definitely can see some metal flake and probably a little bit of pearl, but it's so minimal compared to how we usually do it. It's crazy. Especially because it's twice the amount of material. And what I'm going to do is add half an ounce of black. Then I'm going to add 2 ounces of this krylon clear tintable base. That should do, in theory, is make the black less opaque and more transparent, so more of the particles should actually show through. We'll see what happens. My guess is that it's still not as good as top coating in terms of wow factor and in your face and getting the most out of your material. Just like last time, I'm going to go ahead and add a half of a tablespoon to this 4 ounces of paint. Can't see it very well because it's not very visible, but I can kind of see it in there. Full transparency, I didn't clean this cup beforehand, and there is a little bit of flake, a little bit of other old material left over. So one thing I do notice is that at this 4-to-1 krylon to black mixture, 20% black, 80% krylon, the black is not as black. It's definitely a little bit somewhat grayish. Initial observations, looks a little gray. Quick little walk around of it now that I got it sprayed. Might be able to see some of the blue in there. It's not very significant. Just like the previous test, I'm going to add an equal amount of flake to the mix as I have pearls in there, thus doubling the amount of material total in the mix comparative to what we sprayed the frame with. So double the material, you'd hope to see some more results hopefully, because this didn't show a whole lot so far. Still pretty lackluster, quite honestly. Yep. Nothing too exciting, but it is a little more blue. I'm pretty not thrilled by the results personally, but that's the whole point of this really. I still got some paint left in this cup here. I figured it's time to get a little crazy with it and see what happens. So I'm going to add more material than would probably be recommended just to see if we can get some more comparable results to how we do it. We're 2 ounces left, but at any rate. I'm going to add 1 more of these. That is a teaspoon of pearl and 1 more teaspoon of flake while I'm at it. I've got a little material left. I have enough for 1 more last test. Finally, we're getting some blue showing through. It's still not very exciting. Pretty dull compared to that. So the last spray out was at least 4 times the amount of material that we used, and as you can see, probably I have a little paint left in here, so I'm gonna go absolutely crazy. There's probably only like an ounce, maybe an ounce and a half left in here, and I'm just gonna add a whole nother teaspoon of pearl and flake into this mix to end up with over 8 times the amount that we sprayed on the frame over there. And we'll see if it ever ends up getting close, because I would never add this much material, or just for the sake of the experiment, we're going to see what happens. Hopefully by now it should start looking pretty fancy. We'll see. I still have my doubts at this point. I'm using a pretty big tip, so hopefully it won't clog my gun. That's what it's looking like now. A little better, but it's still going to fall short. When you just mix it straight into the paint, it doesn't hardly do anything. Both on these two. If you're really close and you catch it in the right light, you might kind of see something. Very, very minimal. When you mix it with the clear tintable base, it gets a little better. You can see it from further away. It's still pretty low key comparatively. It's visible from at least a couple feet away now. When you got the double the recommended material with the clear tintable base in black, it shows up even a little bit more. Like I said, you probably see some flake in this because I didn't clean the cup, but for the most part, what you're seeing is pearl anyway, if you're seeing anything here. And then the extreme examples, obviously, they show up a lot more, but that's a lot more material than you really want to throw at it, honestly. So this is obviously pretty blue, but still nothing compared. That's comparing our most extreme example, that blue, with the blue that we shot. It almost got close. But again, that's way more material than you ever want to put into your paint, I'm pretty sure. Figured I'd also give you a direct comparison of these things versus the frame while it's all in the sunlight here, so you can have a better idea. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and final spray out. You can see there's a pretty substantial difference.
I'd say not very impressive. Definitely looks way better on this frame, and that's why we do it how we do it in the inner coat, because it all just gets hidden. I mean, you can see it a little bit in the bright sun, but not really.
And especially in the black, it's basically not even existent there. It just makes for a rough texture for the most part.
It looks pretty cool if that's something you're looking for. It's almost like
if you're like looking for like a midnight blue black color.
Yeah, like it's almost like a gray with blue pearl or something in it. Is it like a dark gray?
Dark gray with
color?
Blue pearl.
Yeah.
Or dark gray with blue pearl and flake. And this is just so much material, you'd never want to spray that because it's not going to bond very well.
Yeah.
And even still, it falls short.
These are the results from the test that we did. Hopefully you found it useful or entertaining. If you like custom paint, make sure to check out our other paint videos. That'll be it for today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time on Brothers Fab and Adventure.